Good morning. I'm Harold Bullock. I'm senior pastor here at Hope, if you're new. And I would enjoy meeting you after the service. I'll be out near the main entry. We're going to take a look at why the news is good. Not the evening news. We're thinking about the news about Jesus Christ. Last week we took a look at why it's good for individuals. Today I'd like to go further and take you on a journey and look at why it's good actually for a society as a whole. And I'd like to start with school. Most of us have gone to some kind of school. Some of us have been homeschooled. But most of us have attended some kind of school. What kind of school did you go to? What was it like? I went to one, of course, elementary school and high school were a long time ago. But I actually went to them. The one I went to was in a suburban community of a town of about 40,000 people, industrial town. And it was suburban. Actually, it was suburban. They didn't have curbs around the sidewalks and around the roads. Blue-collar area. The schools I went to kids were mainly blue-collar parents working in factories in the area. My folks were. And it was pretty decent. There was a lot of Christian influence. It was not a Christian school; it was a public school. But a lot of the teachers went to church, and a lot of the kids had backgrounds in church life, so they sort of behaved themselves. As we got into high school, we had a gang. It was before the franchising of the really dangerous gangs. This was a local group. They were mainly about being cool. And we stayed out of their way, but most people, they weren't necessarily Christian, but they were pretty decent. I went on to college, and a couple of years after college, I met with one of my friends there who had gone to teach in a major city school. And he told me that he had illegally carried a semi-automatic pistol the whole time to protect his life because several teachers had been shot. Oh, boy, that's a very different school from the one I went to. He said, yeah. What's the difference in schools? It's the people who go there. People who teach there, people who go there. Schools are made up of people. And those people, whatever people they are, they have certain patterns of the way they live. That's a lot like society. There's a verse in the Old Testament that's very interesting. And I'd like to launch with it. Blessed are the people whose God is the Lord. Blessed are the people whose God is the Lord. The idea is, blessed are the individual people, but also in the way this is written, blessed is the whole bunch, the whole nation, the whole ethnic group, the whole people group whose God is the Lord. Very interesting. Blessed. You know, very often in our time, you tend to get the idea that if God is the Lord, then boy, those people are really in trouble. But blessed are the people whose God is the Lord. Why? Well, one reason is this. All people do what makes sense to them. You do what makes sense to you. I do what makes sense to me. For some of us, we're very analytical, and we're a lot more logical in deciding what we're going to do. We do what makes logical sense to us. For most of us, we don't think about it that much. We just do it. But it makes sense to us, whether it's get a sandwich, turn left when we shouldn't, or turn right. Well, whatever we do, we're doing what makes sense to us in the moment, giving them where we want to go or what we want, and the situation that we're in. We just do what makes sense to us. All people do this, everyone. Again, some more logical, some of us more emotional, but we always do what makes sense. We don't do what doesn't make sense to us. Judges 17 in the Old Testament talks about a time when there was no king in ancient Israel. My allergies are acting up, so I may cough occasionally. There's no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. If you want to say it a different way, everyone just did what made sense to them. They made sense to them, they did it. Might have been morally making sense, or they just wanted to do what was immoral. But if the immoral made sense to them, so they did it. Everyone did what's right in his own eyes. This is just how we are as people. We function this way. Society itself is made up of masses of people, all kinds of people. We had the imagery of the threads in the tapestry on the video a few moments ago. You're one of the threads in the fabric of this whole society. Your life is one of the threads. There are many other threads. Masses of people, and the masses of people, like you and me, we do what makes sense to us. The kids at my school did what made sense to them. The kids where my friends taught did what made sense to them. People in society do what makes sense to them. The society is also made up of an elite. These are rich, powerful people, some of whom may be high profile, others you may never know about. Rich, powerful people who influence the society. And they do what makes sense to them. And one of the things that makes sense to them is trying to shape the mindsets of the masses. Just the average, ordinary people. So that the masses will, quote, do what makes sense by this new mindset they've learned. And that, as they do it, will bless the elite. That is, it'll give them more money and make money for them. It will give them more power by either ways we vote or policies we adopt. And you never think, well, I think I'd love to give the elite power, but we just move that direction based on how our mindset's been shaped. And then it'll loosen restrictions on them. Very powerful people don't like restrictions. Some are better, some are worse, but they like to do what makes sense to them. This is just how life moves. Ancient Egypt had masses of people and elite. The Greek city-states had masses of people and the elite. The Roman Empire had masses of people and the elites. Every country today has masses of people and some elites. And the elites influence mentalities and direction, especially for their benefit. Aldous Huxley is part of the British intellectual elite, very famous family in philosophy. And Huxley was a philosopher he's died in 1963, but he dramatically impacted my generation here in the United States. He was older, but wrote very well and tremendously impacted people. As he grew older, he wrote a book reflecting on his life. And this is what he said. This is one of my favorite quotes out of books. I like this one because he is so honest. He says, I had motives for not wanting the world to have meaning. Consequently, I assumed that it had none and was able, without any difficulty, to find satisfying reasons for this assumption. Now, he's a philosopher. You would think that a philosopher would study the world and try to figure out what's there and then come up with his reasons. Instead, he makes an assumption about what's there. He doesn't study. He already has an idea. He assumes there's no meaning. There is no reality out there that has any meaning to it. And he began to find reasons to support that. He didn't study and come up with reasons. He found them to support what he had already assumed. This is the guy writing the books. The philosopher, he says, he continues very honest and talks about the general field of philosophy. The philosopher who finds no meaning in the world is not concerned exclusively with a problem in pure metaphysics. Metaphysics is the area where people debate about what is ultimately there behind all of the stuff we see. He says, the philosopher that says there's no meaning, now he might be concerned about this area, but that's not the only thing he's concerned about. He is also concerned to prove that there is not valid reason why he personally should not do as he wants to do, why he should have no restrictions. Or why his friends should not seize political power and govern in the way they find most advantageous, not to the masses, but to themselves. The guy is being very honest here. When you find people who say there's no meaning to the world, philosophers, he says, they might have some ideas in philosophy, but really what's going on is they want restrictions removed from them, and they want better control of power. So he says, for myself, and he was part of the elite, the philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation, sexual and political. In other words, I came up with this because this would get me the removal of sexual limits. I could be immoral. It would be okay with people. And it would get me political power I wanted. The elites do what makes sense to them. They influence the masses to loosen restrictions on them and to improve their power standing. They don't all necessarily agree with each other, but this much they do agree on. So this is the way society functions. Why do I bring this up? Well, it's because everyone does what makes sense to them. When the mindset of people, masses and elites, is shaped by Christ and Scripture, life just flows better for the general people. Why? Because if the mindset is shaped like this, they do that kind of stuff. It makes sense to them. This is what the Old Testament says. Keep his decrees and commands, which I'm giving you today, Moses is writing, so that it may go well with you and your children after you, and that you may live long. Very interesting. God gives his commands so that it might go well with you. We tend to think of God as sort of a grouchy old guy up in the sky. You know, he's got arthritis, he hurts a lot, he's not having a good time, and he doesn't want anyone else to either. So he gives us rules so we can have bad lives. But this is not God. God actually cares for the creation he made, and he cares for you and me. As a matter of fact, he cares for us long before we ever decide to even pay attention to him. And there are things that happen in our lives that actually benefit us. We make choices that hurt us, but he actually desires good for us. So he gives his word, he gives his guidelines so that you can actually have a good life. Because not everything that makes sense to you really helps in the long run. But his ways do. Jesus reflects the same thing. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. Very interesting. If you follow Jesus Christ, you're not following into deprivation and an awful life. I mean, you are going to walk through some hard things. All of us do. But as you walk through them, you're going to find good, even in the middle of the hard things. He comes that life may be full for you. We all have different journeys from that. We're different threads. We all have different journeys. But as we walk with him through our journey, he's come that we might have life to the full. And it'll get even better when we meet him face to face. When people come to Christ, they change. And that's just how life is. There are some people who come to Christ, it seems, and they continue for a little while, and then they just go back to the old ways. We all struggle with the old ways, but if you really come to Christ, you start changing. And the change goes on and on and on. It never stops. We're never done. But it really does change. The way we live changes. Look on the back of your handout. I wrote this up for you. This is a basic comparison generally of the world's ways and Christ's ways. I'm not saying nobody in the world would be like these things of Christ, because this nation particularly has a Christian background. We still have memories of it, but the world's ways is cutting corners. Now, Christ's ways bearing responsibility. We go ahead and do what's right because it's right. We don't cut corners. Expedience. Expedience means I'm going to do what will practically work, even though it might be morally wrong. Might even be illegal. But I'm going to do it because it'll work right here. Well, if you follow Christ, you learn more and more and more that faithfulness is the way you walk. You do what's right by people. Spin. I take the facts and sort of move them around to where they make me look better, or my bunch better. But with the faith, we're for truth. Sometimes it hurts to be for truth because truth hurts us, but we're for truth. Me first. Boy, 2-year-olds know this. Mine! And they push the other kids out of the way to get ahead. They understand this. Well, we do too. But when you come to Christ, you start respecting other people. He pulls you to do this. And you learn more and more about that. Negotiating with others. We all have to deal with people. So we work out ways to sort of negotiate with them, move them around to where we can get what we want. But whenever you come to Christ, you start actually trying to help other people, not just manipulate them. Compromising is the world's way. We stay principled. Now, there are situations where compromises are good, like business deals. You know, you finally reach a conclusion, it's good for both of you. Or maybe political situations where you have to pull together different powerful people and find something you can agree on. But what I'm talking about here is moral principle. We just don't compromise on it. We stay with what Christ says. Blame, very easy to blame people. People get blamed all the time. We look at them with compassion. First we blame them, then we start realizing Christ actually looks more deeply into them than just what they did wrong. Retaliation. You bother me, I get even. Well, Christ starts you working on justice with mercy, not just getting even. Evading authority, you start learning to cooperate with authority. Look at those comparative lists. Let me ask you, if the students at a school, 2 schools, one behaved one pattern, the other behaved the other pattern, which school would you prefer to go to or prefer to send your kid to? I know which one I would prefer. This is the way society is. I change people. When they come to Christ, they change. And change people change society, at least for a time. After the Great Welsh Revival, England, where that movement in 1904, 1905 swept through England, then moved on around the world, actually, a number of other countries. But just the impacts locally, the after effects of the revival, convictions for drunkenness in the county of Glamorgan between 1902 and 1907 dropped 50%. It wasn't because the police could run people out of the bars faster before they got drunk. It's because they weren't getting drunk. Life changed. J. Edwin Orr, researcher, said some jails were empty for a whole year. Basically, the police had to find other jobs. And for some of them, 2 years. Finally, new people move in, more people grow up, didn't know this, and things shift. But there's a change that occurs for the society. One of the things that you tend to hear, I heard it in college, and it continues, is the idea of the noble savage. The real problem is civilization. If people could just live primitively, that's where life is peaceful, blissful. More primitive societies are better off. Rousseau, philosopher, came up with that idea. It turns out not to be true. I've watched PBS articles on Central America, Mexico, Central America, pre-Columbian cultures. And there's this matter of human sacrifice. And I've watched many different shows. I've been interested in that kind of thing. And they tried to tone this down and make it a lot more reasonable what they were doing. But this is recent. Under Mexico City, archaeologists uncovered remains of the infamous skull tower that greeted residents and foes at the Aztec capital. Mexico City is built on that site. One rack alone contained 130,000 skulls. This is not necessarily the skulls of enemies. These are the skulls of people sacrificed. If we sacrificed 100 people a month in our city, that'd be 1,200 in a year. How many years would it take to reach 130,000 for this one rack? 100, more than 100. This was brutal. We've been told a lot of things that just turn out not to be quite true. And, of course, the Aztec culture is not alone. You can look at other cultures around the world. Here's another one. It's just awful. I heard this in college. It's just awful how missionaries have gone into primitive societies and destroyed their cultures. I've heard it there in college many years ago, and I've heard it over and over again through the years. This is sociologist Robert Woodbury. He did research, wrote an article in the American Political Science Review, The Missionary Roots of Liberal Democracy. He studied Africa over the 1800s and early 1900s, country by country. These are his conclusions. Conversionary Protestants, CPs, were a crucial catalyst that initiated the development and spread of religious liberty, mass education, mass printing, newspapers, voluntary organizations, and most major colonial reforms. In short, CPs helped create conditions that made stable democracy more likely for a country. Moreover, religious beliefs motivated most of these transformations. Interesting. He goes on, areas where Protestant missionaries had religious presence in the past are on average more economically developed today with comparatively better health, lower infant mortality, lower corruption, with comparatively greater literacy, higher educational attainment, especially for women, and more robust membership in non-governmental associations, that is, voluntary associations to help the community. Very interesting. That's not what I learned in college. Actual research says a lot of very different things. Whenever Christ dominates, and the scriptures dominate, the elite have to use their powers more cautiously. They aren't necessarily believers, but it doesn't look quite as good to be as abusive. Life flows better for the whole system. Christian mores exert influence. The whole system becomes more humane and self-governed. So, John Adams, brilliant guy, one of the founders of the U.S., extremely well-trained in the law of philosophy, and became a president. He writes this in 1798. It was part of an address talking about the government. We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. In other words, if the people don't have more religion and morality, thinking of Christianity, government's not going to restrain people. Avarice, that's greed, ambition, revenge, or gallantry, acting boldly for my group, would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a fishnet. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate to the government of any other. And of course, we've been proving this over the last several years as we move further and further away from these things and have more and more problems. When the mindsets of the masses move toward Christ in Scripture, it makes sense to do those kinds of things, which turn out to be much healthier for society in general. When the mindsets of the masses move a different direction, guided by the elites, toward paganism, atheism, or other religions actually, life grows worse for the general people by their own moral choices. I'm going to show you some things. As I show you these, I'm not trying to put people down. Please understand this. But what gets said very much in the media very often flies right in the face of real honest-to-goodness research. So here's one. But people make their own choices. Marriage destabilizes in a society, and we're witnessing that. Research indicates that people who live together prior to getting married are more likely to have marriages that end in divorce. So this is the Boston Herald, which is far, far from being a Christian newspaper. They're just reporting research. Now, many people do live together today. It's more of an acceptable thing. Now, you may be in that situation. I'm not trying to condemn you. What I'm saying is these things don't work well for marriage in the overall. And but everyone just seems to think it does. It doesn't. Kids do worse in school based on their home situation. Intact marriages of biological parents, their kids do the best in school. This is a broad study. Cohabiting parents, they're living together without being married, they do less well. Homosexual couples do more poorly. They perform the lowest. Now, this is not politically correct to say, but actual research has produced this. Something else, demonic problems soar. Which is very interesting because mostly we don't think about the devil as a society. This is a statement out of the Telegraph. It's a very respectable English paper. June 3, 2018. The quote, demonic possession is real and victims seeking exorcism should not be ignored. Prominent psychiatrist on the world beyond. The psychiatrist they're talking about is educated at Princeton, then Harvard, is a world-class figure, been in psychiatry 25 years. He also does screening for exorcisms to decide if people actually are possessed or not, and has for many years. He says many psychiatrists actually do this, just nobody will talk about it. He has enough weight to where he decided to speak out. Here's the lead into the article. It is a phenomenon that is on the rise throughout the world. The number of cases of demonic possession and demands for priests to carry out exorcisms is, according to multiple sources, soaring. Why does that soar? Well, here's the reason, friend. When you decide to start moving in the devil's direction, he is glad to meet you quickly. As we deteriorate in our mindsets and different kinds of things make sense to us, we move that way. We do what makes sense to us, and lo and behold, it makes sense to someone else too. So, this is not a Christian newspaper. Very interesting article. You can look it up. The life goes worse for people. The elite gain much more power. They get religious backing, whether it's a different religious system or the religion of atheism. They get backing, and they grow much more bold in oppression. We're seeing this in the U.S. right now, as a number of Christian business people have been taken to court and fined hundreds of thousands of dollars for sticking by their convictions in their business. One guy just won a case at the Supreme Court, went back home to Colorado, and he is now in court again on the same kind of thing. They decided to ignore the Supreme Court. Why? Well, the elite want things a certain way. So here we go. They get a lot bolder, more oppressive. System grows tyrannical. It obeys the elites more and more, and it gets less and less concerned about the masses. They just need to fit in. On the back of your handout again, here's a comparison of societal trends. These are governmental, social trends. I've written them down for you. It's based on a lot of research for me over the years, but you can take them with a grain of salt. You can do your own research. I'm going to recommend a couple of books. But here's a general comparison. If Christ is in the society, or the society is without Christ. The scriptures really don't guide things anymore. If Christ is in society, the state has to obey God. There are limits for it. Without Christ, the state is God. It is the ultimate. It says what will be. Justice with mercy. The justice system tends to focus in the other system on justice by shifting sociological opinions and conclusions that favor the elite. This is just how it goes. Doesn't matter if it's the U.S., Europe, South America, Africa. Freedom with responsibility. People are respected by the state. On the one hand, the other is people are owned by the state. Let me show you something that happened in Texas. This is 1986. I was here when this occurred. James Maddox was the Attorney General of the state, very antagonistic to Christians. And he lost a major suit that went to the Supreme Court in Texas as people opposed him. Here's an excerpt. Meeting with a group of Christians in Austin, Texas on May 1986, Texas Attorney General James Maddox revealed his true colors when asked, "Is it true that the state of Texas owns our children?" Christians are asking him. Maddox retorted, "Yes, it is true, and not only your children, but you too." I personally disagree with him. Now, if the state owns me, what do you do with what you own? Whatever you want to, my friend. But he's a part of an elite. Let's move on. You can look at several other things. There's a culture of life versus a culture of selective death. We start getting rid of people who are inconvenient, diseased. This is happening in Europe right now. And of defective adults or bothersome people. Hitler got rid of a lot of bothersome people. We have an actual care for sick and miserable people. We try to help them. Move on down. God gave human rights on the one hand that the state can't take away. On the other hand, the state gives civil rights that it can take back anytime it wants to. Constitution states otherwise, but this is where we come to. Marriage is different. Childbearing. It's a human right under Christ. Childbearing is directed by the state and the other system. We have to take away, this is a quote from a Nobel Prize winner, a British man. He helped figure out the structure of DNA. Brilliant guy, but this is his statement. We have to take away from humans in the long run their reproductive autonomy as the only way to guarantee the advancement of mankind. That means that you can be told by some people that you cannot have children, period, or you might have one, or you might have two, or whatever. But it will be dictated to you. This will not be your choice. This is a Nobel Prize winner in England. Now, The Guardian, British paper. China ends one-child policy after 35 years. Yep, for many years, you'd only have one child in China. Now you can have two. Some of you would really be in trouble with the government. But this is how it is under tyranny. For us, people need to make their own choices here. Child raising by parents versus child raising state dictated. This is Richard Dawkins. He's a very famous man, British biologist, famous atheist, written a lot of attacks on Christianity, several very popular books. He says this, "I am biased in favor of freeing children to learn and not letting parents be too doctrinaire in indoctrinating their children." This man's still alive. Too doctrinaire. Who decides when you are being too doctrinaire? Mr. Dawkins and his friends. You don't decide. And what I'm saying is, as the system moves more atheistic, it moves more controlling and more for the favor of the elite and less care about you. This is just how things move. As Christ influences society, people just do much better. It's never perfect, but they just do so much better. A couple of resources for you. What's So Great About Christianity by D'Souza. It'd be helpful. Give you actual stuff. And then this is more recent. America's Blessings by Rodney Stark. The subtitle is How Religion Benefits Everyone, Including Atheists. That's sort of one of those in-your-face books. This is what the Amazon blurb about Stark says. Distinguished researcher Rodney Stark, and he is, seeks to clear the air of this hostility and debunk many of the debate's most widely perpetuated misconceptions, the debate about whether or not Christianity is good for the world, by drawing from an expansive pool of sociological findings. He's just going to refer to research. So you might check this out on your own. Christ influences society, and they begin to think his ways of things make sense. They just do differently. It blesses the individuals. It blesses the whole bunch. I want to encourage you, friend, if you've never yielded your life to Jesus Christ, consider that and find out what's involved and make an intelligent decision. If you're already a Christ follower, I want to encourage you to pray for people who don't know Christ, people you know, maybe people you love. Pray for them. Ask God to open hearts, because what opens up in front of them is life. It's not the old man keeping them from having fun. It's life. You stop shooting your own toes and feet off. As you have opportunity, tell your story. Tell about your thread in this whole thing. Tell your story of what Christ has done for you and how he's changed life for you. Your life's not perfect. I know mine's not. But oh, what it could be. Tell your story. You're doing people a favor. You're doing the whole society a favor. The gospel changed ancient Rome over time, 300 years. But it changed it from an apex predator to something more compassionate. It was still a mess because it was Rome. But it changed it. The gospel allowed the flourishing of Western civilization, set the basis for this nation, and blesses people individually, and it blesses the society. Blessed are the people whose God is the Lord. Don't be intimidated, friend. Don't be rude or crude. Don't be inappropriate. But ask God for opportunities to just share the truth of how Christ has changed things for you.